There we go again. Welcome to Tilberthwaite, which is I'm going to say a village, but there's a couple of houses there, and there's a farm there, so not really a village. A hamlet? I don't know what the definition of a hamlet is. So you might guess from the name, Tilberthwaite. I'm in the Lake District, and I was up yesterday. It's relatively early this morning. Didn't get to bed until about 2 o'clock last night. So having a couple of scoops. But it's one of those days when the weather's neither one thing nor the other. So don't know if you can see, but it's just quite low grey cloud. But we'll see how the day goes. But the first thing I'm going to do, I've parked up and I'm heading to a place called Cathedral Cavern, and as the name suggests, it's a cave system. It's a man-made cave system. I think it's an old slate quarry, and it's not far, but it's going to be an interesting proposition for me because I've never shot in a cave before, so I'm anticipating some potential issues with lighting and so on and so forth, and I'm sure definitely it'll be kind of long exposures, but I'm quite excited. There's something in, I think all of us, isn't there, about going into caves and feeling like you're exploring. I remember as a kid going visiting caves on holiday with a torch, so I'm quite looking forward to it, but we'll see when we get there. I guess the ideal situation would be kind of some bright light, I'm assuming, shining into the cave, but I'm not going to get that. But we're going to have a look and we'll see. And after my late night, it's a relatively easy walk and there's no hills or anything, so off we go. Well, here we go. Look at this. I have to admit, I'm a little bit excited. There's the entrance. That's why I've got the head torch on. So this is the tunnel entrance. So I've got to go. Oh, it's a lovely echo there. Got to go in there, and it doesn't look very promising from here, does it? It doesn't look very photogenic, just a tunnel, and I look like I'm going to have to stoop a bit to get in. But yeah, it's about a 20-minute walk from where I parked the car. So, quite excited. Really quite excited. So, you can see, weather's not fantastic, but off we go. Should we go together and see what it's like? Make sure I've got my head torch on. Now, it'll probably take a little while for my eyes to adjust, but bit of stooping. And oh, if I hear a growl, I'm going back. Gosh, so it really is. Oh, I can stand up a bit straighter. You probably can't see me anymore. But it's quite an exploration. Definitely couldn't come if you didn't have a torch or two, which I've got. Start to see some light. Turn the torch off. And up we go. Ooh. This has never been here before, so it's an exploration. Okay, so there's obviously a way in there. I might need both hands free for this. Let's see what we're up to. Well, here's the top. It's quite eerie. So I think I need to go down this way. but I need to take both hands, so I'll turn you off and then we'll try again when we get down proper underground. Well, I've come right through and out the other side, so I'll take you this tunnel here is a lot shorter than the other one. So but there's a bit of you come through the tunnel obviously, and then there's a bit of a steep climb down, so water dripping, and I imagine the GoPro is going crazy now because of the darkness. But then we come out into the main cavern, so hopefully the white balance and stuff adjusts. But there you go, you've got to climb down through from up there. So it's quite steep and slippy. There's a big pool. And I'll just show you, the floor's very uneven. I don't know how deep that is. It looks pretty deep. And this is cordoned off because there's a rock fall. But I stood up there before. But you've got to come through this process here. It's quite steep. I'll show you, because I might go back out that way. Don't know, haven't decided yet. But if you do come, be prepared with torches and proper footwear and all that type of stuff. So you've got to climb down here. So I wouldn't recommend it for your granny. But anyway, I'm going to look for some compositions. I'm imagining they're going to be slow shutter speed, but great acoustics. Woo! Anyway, stop messing around, Damian, and let's get going. Let's see what we can do. There's a big pillar holding up the, well, hopefully holding up the ceiling. Right, let's see what we can create. I don't know how effective the GoPro is going to be in picking me up, so I hope you can see me. Great echo though. I should record all my pieces here. So I'm looking at a composition with the opening and this pillar. But there's a real challenge, clearly, because that's quite bright and this is incredibly dark. So to try and capture that in one exposure is impossible, because you'll get either the opening exposed quite nicely and then that will all be just complete darkness, or you get this exposed reasonably and that will be kind of like the sun shining, be so overexposed. So I'm going to have to take an image, or maybe two, depending on kind of the composition, that exposes for the inside of the cave, and then an image that exposes for the outside of the cave, and try and get a balance somehow. So I'm loving this echo. It makes me sound like I'm a kind of blockbuster coming this summer. So here's the composition I'm going for. So obviously the bright spot is the opening, and at the moment the cave is quite nicely exposed. One of the things I'm not keen on is all of this floor area. So this kind of floor area is just a bit dull. So I'm going to reposition my camera a little bit to exclude some more of that floor area. It's too much floor. So I'll reposition a little bit. If you bear with me a second. So get less floor in. So I need some floor in so it doesn't look like the cave's just floating. But as you can see at the moment, I'm taking my exposure reading on the pillar. So if I take one there, and that's giving me a 10-second exposure. So bear with me while that takes, because then I'll show you what I get when I take an exposure reading on the opening out to daylight. A little bit disappointed. I think the cave is fantastic. It looks amazing. A little bit disappointed because if it was really bright sunlight, you'd possibly get a shaft of light shining in. So anyway, that's taken. So now I'll move my exposure box over. So what was that again? A 10-second exposure. move my exposure box over to the opening, and now that is suggesting a, let's have a look, a half a second exposure. So a big difference, a big difference. So try and get that blend together. Now what I'm going to do, so someone asked a good question about bracketing, so that's essentially bracketing. I'll just turn the live view off for a second to save my battery. Someone asked a good question in my previous video about how do you choose how much bracketing. So if you can use the obviously auto function in the camera, but what you should do is look at the brightest, which is, you know, this is a perfect example. You've got one really bright element of the image and one really dark element of the image. So take an exposure reading on the brightest element and take an exposure reading on the darkest element, and you can see the difference between the two. So that was half a second and 10 seconds. So then when you're doing your, in that case I only took 2 images, so I took one for that and one for that. If you were going to bracket, you'd look at trying to make sure that you had one exposure at one end of the range and another exposure at the other end of the range, and then one in the middle. So what I'm going to do now is take one in the middle. So I'm kind of doing manual bracketing rather than relying on the camera to do it. So I think that area kind of between the pillar and the opening is about the middle, so about here. So let's have a look. I'm going to take one there. That's suggesting, no, that's back at 10, so maybe the brighter bit up on the, that's about 6 seconds. Might drop that down a bit. So 5 seconds is about halfway between. I'm going to take an image there, and then we'll see how they turn out. But I'll need to do a bit of jiggery pokery in Lightroom. But I'm going to play with that a little bit more, and then look for some different compositions. So I'm down on my hands and knees now. So previously I was over the other side of that pillar, so hopefully you can get a better view of it. And it's kind of, the light is coming from this direction now. So I'm down on my hands and knees in the wet and the cold because of this pool. It seems, I think that's quite deep. And I'm sure I read somewhere at one point there were goldfish in there, which obviously someone's just put goldfish in, which is, for me is a pretty cruel thing to do. But anyway, I wanted to get a reflection across this pool, so I'm right down low. I've splayed my tripod out as low as possible, and I've set up a composition that's looking across the surface of this pool. So I'll it's a bit precarious and it's not very comfortable, but hopefully you can see that now. So I'm focused on the bottom of the pillar and getting some reflections in the water. So I'm underexposing quite considerably, because if I go for the recommended exposure that the camera suggests based on, let's see, so it's suggesting a 5 second exposure. That's far too bright. I don't want a bright image. I want a image that just hints at what's there. So that's a 1.6 second exposure. So it's more subtle. It's a kind of catching, sorry about pointing over there, it's just catching the light rather than trying to make a kind of an accurate depiction of what it looks like to my eye. I'm trying to go something a little bit more arty because of the challenging conditions. So just underexposing, so I just pick up the highlights and the reflection. That's the idea anyway, but it's not very comfortable. And just one tip, when you go, I've probably said this before, but if you're going for long shutter speeds, this is your best friend. So long shutter speeds will always highlight dust and grit on the end of your lens, more so than a fast shutter speed. So these microfiber cloths, you'll see camera people, retailers selling microfiber cloths for a fortune. You can get them off Amazon for, I think I got 10 for about £4. So, and they're perfect. So my lens is probably never been cleaner than it is today, because I've worked really hard on that. So I'm It's weird because I can hear my voice coming back to me, kind of a split second after I speak. But I'm going to maybe shift the composition around a little bit. But because I'm kneeling down, I can't really talk to you too much. But I'll work on that a bit, and then I might look for a kind of a process from over there, or maybe over there. But time will tell. Well, a bit more conventional pose now. Partly, I had to stand up because my legs were starting to seize up. But it's obvious when you come into the cave that that pillar is the kind of central feature. It dominates the. In fact, if that pillar wasn't there, the roof would probably fall in. But also, the cave would just be a kind of a big void. That's the kind of focus for the cave. It gives the cave a kind of a sense of purpose, whether that makes sense. So what I'm trying to do is capture an image that shows that and it's quite a challenge because I'm maybe 20 yards from the pillar. So to get a view of that pillar and the cave is a challenge without using some sort of fisheye lens. It's quite a challenge, but I think I've got something that at least gives the sense. So tripod's back in a bit of a more normal position pose, but here we go. So here's obviously the pillar, and I've deliberately set it so it's coming from my kind of bottom left-hand corner and the natural shape of the pillar. I've also deliberately set it so it's on my rule of thirds, and you can just about see that it's where it joins the ceiling is showing. I'm on F8 and I'm focused on the pillar. I don't really need a huge depth of field because the kind of background will be a bit dark, but I'm taking a reading on the pillar here because it's about mid-tone, but I'm going to underexpose a little bit, so that gives me a 4-second exposure. And what hopefully that means is I get some of the detail in this rock here, so I'm going to lose detail in the darkness there, but I am in a cave after all. So I'm going to take that and then I'll have a look at it. And one of the things I'm going to look at, so if I look at my histogram, you can see it's loaded toward the darks, which I expected, but it's not that bad. It's not kind of the histogram's not shooting off the top of the kind of the register. So the camera knows there are dark points there, but they're not they're not pitch black. So I'm hoping that works out. I'm just wondering about doing a kind of portrait version. I'm also thinking about just panning up a bit and taking an image upwards and then stacking them together on top of. So normally you do a panorama side to side, but you can do a panorama up and down. So I might try that and then see what the portrait version looks like. It is a bit odd because I can hear my voice coming back, but also there's lots of drips and echoes, and there's something in that kind of, I don't know, deep somewhere in the recess of your brain, there's that kind of view from when we were kind of living in caves that kind of, is there a saber-toothed tiger about to get me? Oh, is it getting a bit brighter as well? Might just be my imagination. But anyway, I'm going to try that and then try a portrait version. So I've receded back into the darkness. I've come right to the corner of the cave because what I want, and hopefully you can see me, what I wanted to do is get the sense of the volume, as it were, of the cave and the height. And you can only do that really by coming right to the corner, and it's a bit wet and muddy. But I've got a composition that I'm quite pleased with, even if I do say so myself, because I think the composition gives a sense of the depth of the cave. So I'll talk you through the process. So I'll brighten this. So I've got this rock in the foreground, this flat slab, which gives kind of foreground interest. Then there's the pillar in kind of the midground, and then I quite like the fact that there's darkness behind the pillar because it then gives a sense of depth, hopefully. And I'm taking an exposure reading just off the bottom of the pillar. So It's giving me I'm focused on the pillar as my main point of interest. It's giving me about a kind of just over 3-second exposure. And what I hope that does is capture that depth, but also what it probably doesn't come through very well on the GoPro. There's some nice colours, kind of oranges and blues, and then there's a little bit green. So I'm hoping I can capture some of that colour as well, because it's not just a grey cave. It's not just grey. It's you know, if I'm looking up at the ceiling, there's quite a kind of an orange and blue hue to the cave. So hopefully I can capture that. But yeah, I might take another one there. I'm going to just shift. Sorry, but just shift the composition a little bit, and hopefully capture that sense. And now I've just thought one last one from here. I'm going to do a quite underexposed, just for the heck of it. So there we go. Right, I think I've probably done the cave to death. But I'll go and get I left my stuff over to the side, so I'll go and get my stuff, and then if I see any more compositions, but otherwise I'm heading out. So that was Cathedral Cavern. I hope you enjoyed the trip. A little bit different from the usual landscape stuff. So I'll be interested to see how the images turn out. So I'm quite looking forward to processing them because I've never done any underground photography before, and I'm not sure when I'll do any more underground photography. So quite enjoyed it, and it's interesting. Just as I was packing my stuff up, a school party arrived, like primary school age, maybe 8, 9, 10, and they came down the short tunnel and they were like, wow, look at this, wow. And hopefully I captured some of that wow and the wonder. But yeah, a bit unusual, but I hope you enjoyed the trip. It was enjoyable, so I'd recommend it if you're in the area. But be prepared, you need a torch, you need boots, and be prepared for wet, slippy conditions and darkness. So if you're claustrophobic, don't go. Although you could go down the shorter tunnel, but the long tunnel is quite an experience. And on that point, about locations, I'm always happy to share the locations. So quite a few people have commented about how seeing my films has inspired them to go to those locations, which is it's a compliment to hear that. But if you do go, and if you make a film, or you blog or whatever, and you went because I inspired you to do it, it'd be nice to have a shout out, so I'd appreciate that if you could. So I'm always happy to share locations. I know there's some other photographers who won't do it, won't let people know where they're shooting. They'll just say, oh, I'm in the Lake District, but they won't say where. I'm always happy to let you know where I've been. So walking back to the car, so suddenly a bit of an uphill bit. I don't remember this on the way down. So hope you enjoyed that. Don't think the next film will be underground, but I'm actually probably going to make the next film this afternoon. The weather's not great. It's not rainy, but just grey. Not great for landscape work. But I call this Tupperware light. So it's a bit like you're in a Tupperware box looking out. It's just nothingness in terms of light. But anyway, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one, wherever that might be.